This season, turn it up to 10. Sorta like a bad habit, we gon' do it again. Ready or not, we're gonna tie up some men. Go tell a 36, try to grab all the friends. We're back like we never left. On track like a treble clef. Skip a beat on the 7th rest. Bring feast, we don't pass them over. We got the first fruits, no way to show us. This yoke is easy, this burns light. Even with a loud mouth trying to eat at the mic. Even if we down south, the humidity spike. Veils torn in two, so we gon' be alright. Don't stop, they're in need of it though. Through grace by faith, they could easily grow. New wave, new age, new way to see bro. Now one truth, life, one way to his throne. Can't live on that bread alone. Every word of God's mouth will fuel me on. That's scripture, that's Christ alone. That's grace alone, that's faith alone. All glory to God, cause that's his alone. Since the lamb's been slain, we can each belong. The Lord is my strength, my peace, and my song. I'll lay it all down at the feet of his throne. So relax, God is still in control. He knows every care, every fear that you hold. He knows every hair, every need for your soul. Nothing new around here, this story's been told. I'm just saying there's a time in the season, you gotta be a Berean. If you just hear and believe it, you could be walking with demons. It could be rendering season. All the things that go to God, that's a little like treason. Wait, welcome back, my friends. Did you ever really think we could pass the 10? Our socks up, we about to trend. Cause the whole 36 wanna rap again. Wait, sounds too good to be true. Like Rabbinic Candy Land, ain't no ladder, just shoot. We hold true if it's loaded in the cannon. Best believe it's understanding. If it's not, it ain't proof. Like sacred name of the 2-house frame. You get something tickle, then you fill it in the blanks. It's hide and seek, let's see if you can find out all the little messages you hit before the timeout. Ever seen a scholar with a blue belt? I have, he's about to make your food melt. The loud one and he strikes again, but don't let him close range, he gon' bite your friends. So relax, God is still in control. He knows every care, every fear that you hold. He knows every hair, every need for your soul. Nothing new around here, this story's been told. I bet you feel weak and your life is in tatters. With bruised feet, your body is battered. You can't reach, trying to climb up that ladder. Sit back and hold fast till Messiah matters.
What's up? Welcome to Messiah Matters. This is episode 550. If you're new to this show, let me introduce myself. My name is Caleb Haig. I am the director of Torah Resource, a Messianic Jewish company that was started in 2002. But wait, plot twist, we happen to be one law. What does that mean? Well, stick around. You'll find out if you don't know already. Hey, I want to say what's up and thanks for being with me to everybody in the chat room. It's a slow showing today, but we got more people coming in. It's okay. We're going to have fun today. Okay, we're going to jump right in. You know, I've been liking the speed of just jumping right into what we're doing. And so that's exactly what we are going to do. So I was looking the other day. I downloaded, somebody had made a comment on one of our YouTube channels. On this YouTube channel. And I don't remember how I saw it. I think I went and looked at a video or something, but I saw a comment. So the other day, I downloaded the, the YouTube Studio app, and lo and behold, there was like a lot of comments that I've never seen. So I started going through them. I started kind of responding to some of them, and I thought, you know what? Some of these are really good. I think what we should do is we should try to look at some of them. So that's what we're going to do. I just pulled two of them. It's not a lot. Don't worry. This from Scott in Texas. That's literally his handle, Scott in Texas. This is what he says. He says, this topic may only be understood by first understanding the identity of one Israel. Okay, he's talking about one law and like Torah keeping and these kind of stuff. So identity of one Israel, the faithful, obedient followers of Elohim. 2, the northern kingdom of Israel, not the same as Israel. And 3, the southern kingdom of Judah. Conflating these terms is error. There are still 12 tribes. Judaism is not the faith of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It came later, during Babylonian captivity, via rabbinic traditions. Messianic Judaism then is a continuation of the rabbinic traditions while also accepting Yeshua as the Messiah. Okay, so Scott can have his views on this. That's totally fine. I'm actually more interested in the idea of almost like this two-house idea, okay? So somebody asked me the other day what I mean by the term Jew. Like because they were saying, well, that just encapsulates Judah. And actually somebody in the chat room, I think it was last week or the week before, made essentially the same comment that the term Jew is a modern invention, and that it wasn't used that way in the first century. Now, this is true. I will concede to this, that initially the term Jew referred to the Judeans, right? It referred to people from Judah. It was not a blanket statement for anyone who was Jewish. However, Paul does use the term Judaism, right? He says, I was advancing much in Judaism. And so even in Paul's writings, we start to see a shift. Now, it is my contention, I believe, that in 70, we had another dispersion, right? So the tribes are dispersed around the world, and when I say Jew, like Jew or Jewish or Judaism, I'm not referring to the tribe of Judah. I'm referring to all 12 tribes, because I don't think people know. You can't look at a Jewish person and say, oh, they're from the tribe of Benjamin, like they could in the first century, right? Paul says, I'm from this tribe, right? So my point is that when when 70 happened and the tribes were dispersed, no longer do we have a separation of the northern and southern tribes. I think that what happens is you have this dispersion, and it all kind of gets lost. And so when I use the term Jew, what I am referring to is anyone from the 12 tribes. And I think that when the tribes come back to Israel, that you're not going to see this distinction between northern and southern tribes anymore. You're just going to see, as it should be, one nation of Israel. And that's what I mean by when I say the word Jew. I'm not referring to a specific tribe. And this comment kind of brought that up for me. Now, I'm not actually going to respond to Scott. Scott can have his ideas about how modern Judaism came about. And I will say this, I agree that the Judaisms, and when I say Judaisms, what I mean is like the various sects of Judaism today. When I think of those sects today, I don't think that that's what Yeshua was necessarily following. Now, certainly parts of it he was, right? He says the Pharisees make their tzitzit long and their tefillin big, but he never says these Pharisees, they put something on their head, they shouldn't do that, right? I mean, so it's almost as if I'm more and more coming to the belief that Yeshua is working within the Judaisms of his time, and that he is promoting what he believes, and obviously since he believes it, it is true, what he believes to be the correct form of Judaism. I think that he is definitely working within Judaism, and I think that he's showing the correct way, which is of the heart, right? The correct way to follow the commandments, the correct way to follow God, the correct way to live out the Torah, what we call halakha. That was another question that somebody asked. What do you mean when you say halakha? Halakha just means to walk or go in Hebrew, but when we refer to halakha today, what we're referring to is the way that we live out the commandments. So anyway, this is my view of like the tribes being split. I don't think that when they come back together, you're going to have the northern and southern tribes. In fact, I think that we see this also in Jeremiah 31 and following. He says, a new commandment I give to the house of Israel and the house of Judah. But then that's the only time he mentions Judah. Judah goes away after that, right? He doesn't mention Judah again. Why? Because I think that ultimately all we have is Israel in the end time, in the eschaton. Thank you, Scott in Texas, for your comment. Okay, this next one, I love this. J.I. Bible Follower says, you went from kippah to bald to hat. First of all, not bald. But I think what he means is nothing covering my head, right? So you went from kippah to bald to hat. Let's stop again. I did wear a kippah for, I don't know, 30 years of my life. I think I took my kippah off in 2017. And I have my reasons for that. I've wrestled back and forth on that. My father, even to this day, still wears a kippah, and I don't have a problem with that. I think that that's great. If other people want to wear kippahs, my son has a kippah, and he wears it every once in a while. And I bought him another kippah just the other day. So it's I'm not against head coverings in any way, shape, or form. And yes, I did wear a kippah for probably maybe even more than 30 years of my life. So, and if you look at old videos, right, I have a kippah on. Okay, so you went from kippah to bald to hat. You also seem to have gone from Orthodox Messianic Judaism to quasi-evangelistic Messianic of some sort, but now you seem more Orthodox Messianic Jewish. I like where you're at now, but I'm curious about your stance and transitions and how and why you got here. Thank you. This is a great question. And I think that people who have watched this show for a long time have seen this kind of pendulum swing, right? So I think and I'll run through this quickly. I think most people know that I was raised in a Messianic Jewish house. From about the time I was 5 or 6. I was actually trying to find the timeline. I know that by 1987, when I was 6 years old, Beit Hillel was already forming, which is the synagogue that I grew up in. That means before that, I was at a different synagogue called Beit Simcha. So we, pretty much my whole life, I grew up in a Messianic Jewish home. At the same time, my father was a non-denominational Christian pastor. So my dad was leading a Messianic Jewish synagogue on Saturdays, and we were going to church, and he was co-pastoring a non-denominational Christian church on Sundays. And I grew up doing that all the way until I was about 16 years old. When I hit 16, I left the non-denominational Christian church, and I went full-time into the Messianic Jewish synagogue, and there was no Christian church anymore. So fast forward, and to the progression that this person is seeing, right? The J.I. Bible follower. So when I get married, I have kids, okay, and we are still part of the Messianic Jewish synagogue. And my wife and I felt like something was going on, like the Lord was leading us somewhere, but we weren't really sure where that was. So after a lot of discussion and prayer, and I probably talked to 30 people asking for counsel. And basically my wife and I came to the conclusion that, well, let's back up for just a second. There was some specific things that I saw happening in the Messianic Jewish synagogue. This is what was going on. We had a large congregation. It was probably 200 people. And what would happen is people who were not Messianic Jews, they weren't in the Messianic realm at all. They were in the Christian church. They would come to like this question of the Sabbath. They would basically say, should we be keeping the Sabbath? And so they'd be looking for other people who kept the Sabbath, and they would find us, right? And so they would come to the Messianic Jewish synagogue. They would walk in, and the congregation I grew up in was, I don't know, Orthodox, like conservadox maybe, in practice. Back then, it was like full liturgy service, a Torah service, and people who had never seen that before, they come in, and it was just complete culture shock. And they would essentially come one time, they would have this culture shock, and we'd never see them again. And so as my wife and I are praying about like, okay, Lord, where do you want us to go? What do you want us to do? I saw that, and I thought, you know what? We need some kind of a bridge. And I've talked about our bridge church. So we need some kind of a bridge for people who are in the church and want to keep Torah, but aren't like, they don't know anything about like Messianic Judaism. What would that look like? And so we started to talk about that. So I was sent out by that synagogue to start what we call a bridge church. And it basically looked like a Baptist church. I mean, I wore a suit every Shabbat to church. We sang out of the hymn book, right? We sang hymns a cappella out of the hymn book. We had it was what I would consider to be a pretty standard Baptist service. And to do that, now at the same time, I took my kippah off for totally different reasons. And so we we started this bridge church, and we still met on Shabbat. I still wore tzitzit. We kept the festivals, still kept kosher, but we looked a lot more like a church. And, I was thinking a little bit like Paul says to the Jews, to those under the law, became as one under the law. You know that passage in 1 Corinthians, right? It was almost like that. Like, we kind of shed some of the rabbinic tradition, and we did that to help people try to find the truth of the Torah. And I think it's important to note, I don't think that rabbinic Judaism is necessarily binding. I don't think that we have to do the things that the rabbis say. So I had no problem going and pastoring a church like this. We did that for several years. We did that for about 5 years. Once that disbanded, and it disbanded well, I mean, there was no animosity or anything, but the Lord kind of told us it was time, that was it. We didn't know what the Lord wanted for us. We didn't know if the Lord wanted us to continue to be in the Christian church, or if he wanted us to go back to the Messianic synagogue, or what. Now, I have said on this show for a very long time that community is extremely important. And I think that it's we could say it's commanded, right? Micha Chodesh is a holy gathering. And so I've said, if you don't have a congregation near you that's Torah observant, you should find other believers. You should, if that means go to the church, you need to be in the church. And if that means you have to move, you have to move. And so we knew that we had to go somewhere, but we just didn't know what the Lord wanted. So we ended up going back to the Christian church, and we went to a Presbyterian church for about a year. We went to a non-denominational Christian church for a year. And I will say this, that it was very hard. It was a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. I think I realized how different I think my practice is. And ultimately what we're talking about is practice here, right? We're talking about practice, but there were theological issues that were constantly coming up, and it really kind of gave me a wake-up call as to the differences and how different I think a lot of our beliefs are. So all of that to say, we have come back to the Messianic synagogue, and it was a very quick transition. As soon as we hit the Messianic synagogue, it was instantaneous. Like, I'm back home. And so, the commenter is correct. I went from kippah to bald to hat. And so I don't wear my hat all the time. I don't think that I have to have my head covered or anything like that. But I do wear a hat a lot. I think that my most recent aha moment, and I said this last week or the week before, was when I was reading Paul Sloan's book. And not that I agree with Paul Sloan and his book. Actually, I don't. But something just struck me of how Jewish Yeshua is, obvious, right? But like how Jewish he is and how he is working within that frame. He's working within the constructs of a Judaism. Now, granted, it's different than he's not concerned about the man-made traditions of the Pharisees. He's pushing against the norms of the Judaisms of the time, but he's working within a Judaism. And this is kind of what's blowing my mind recently, right? Is that I'm looking at the Christian church and I'm saying it's totally other. Like and I'm not trying to say that people in the Christian church aren't saved or anything like that. What I'm saying is that there's been a birth of a new religion, and I don't think that Yeshua was necessarily trying to do that in any way, shape, or form. I think he was trying to work within the Judaisms of the day, but to show the truth, right? He's showing the right or correct brand of Judaism as it were. So when I look at the church, they want to be totally other than the synagogue. They want to be totally other than Judaism. And I don't think, like, you're claiming and trying to be a disciple of a Jewish rabbi, right? Like, to me, that, like, what does that mean? That means that we should try to then emulate and follow his brand, if you will, of Judaism. Now, of course, a lot of these words are probably, not the best choice for those words, but this is how I've gotten back to where I'm at. Do I think everyone has to look like me? Is this the brand that I think everyone has to ascribe to? No, I don't. And this is actually, I think, one of the things that the Lord did when I was in this church, which we called Alive in Messiah, AIM. When I was pastoring this church, it made me realize that there can be a lot of different forms of practice, and a lot of different forms. Different congregations can look different. People's practice can be different in how they live out the halakha. But what I think is important is covenant membership, and then obviously keeping the commandments. How that looks for you is up to you. So I don't think that everybody has to look like me or do things exactly like me or anything like that. And I think that that's ultimately what I really took from the time that I was in the church to now. So comment in the chat room, aside from Tanakh commandments regarding the temple and sacrifices, do you consider all other commandments from Torah to be your goals on how to live today? Yeah, I think that the Torah is it's the how to live life guidebook, right? So the Torah itself, the first 5 books of Moses, I think is it's the mirror of God. It shows us the nature of God, which ultimately shows us the nature of the Mashiach. It shows us the nature of Yeshua. And if we are following Yeshua, then to me, it is the greatest joy to try to live out the Torah as best we possibly can. Yeah. I hope I answered that question correctly. Okay. So that took a long time. That's okay, though. It's okay that it took a long time. Let's just say this. You can shoot me an email, chegg@torahresource.com, chegg@torahresource.com. You can call me, 253-465-3205. You won't talk to me, just talk to an answer machine. And you can ask questions, do whatever. Doesn't matter. Go to torahresource.com. There, by the way, hey, we just came out with a new course. Eitan Ben Levi put together a course on thinking logically, so critical thinking, and how to do that from a biblical worldview. Go check it out. It's on the homepage right now. You can sign up for it. It's an evergreen class, so you take it on your own time, and yeah, I think you'll like it. It's good. Okay, and please subscribe to this YouTube channel. I know it sounds weird, but it really does help me. All right, let's jump into something else. So we've been harping on the Messianic Judaism for the leaders within the largest Messianic Jewish circles, UMJC and MJAA, for months now. It's been a long time, and I think it's been fruitful. I think it's been fun, but I thought, let's see a different perspective. Now, I think that I'm preaching to the choir on this one, so that's fine. But I found a Lutheran leader, pastor, and this is from Ask the Pastor. And he has a question. Somebody writes in a question on Messianic Judaism, and he answers. And I thought, hey, you know what? Let's take a break from going through Rudolph's article. Let's take a break from reading. I've been reading Kinzer. I haven't done it on the show yet, but reading Kinzer. Let's take a break from, watching Daniel Juster. Let's go back to maybe watching something a little bit different. So that's what we're going to do today. Let's check it out. So this give me just one second here. This from Ask the Pastor. And like I said, this gentleman is Lutheran. I believe. Modern Messianic Movements is the title of this. I'll link it in the show description. This is totally other, but a comment. So he's got the collar, right? He's got the Lutheran collar. Now, I don't think that the Lutherans call them priests, which is great, because as soon as I saw the collar, I thought Episcopal priest, right? Or Catholic priest, but he's not. The point here, though, is I think that anytime you have a movement or a denomination or anything that says we have replaced the priesthood with a different priesthood. In other words, we have priests we have priests today. I think that you're looking at essentially false doctrine. I don't want to say false religion because I think there are genuine people in pretty much every denomination, but you can't say that we replace the priesthood with something that's totally not a priesthood. Okay, so I'm off on a tangent now. Anyway, let's hear what this gentleman has to say.
Greetings, y'all. Welcome back to another episode of ATP, Ask the Pastor. Today, we have a question about, modern Messianic movements. Dear Pastor, my question is about Messianic movements that exist in modern society, such as Messianic Judaism and the Black Hebrew Israelites. Are the Jewish people today no longer God's chosen people? And can any Christian really truly convert to Judaism by way of some of these Messianic movements that I have just mentioned?
So this is such an important question, right? I mean, it's such an important question. Are the Jews today still God's chosen people? And I think that even within the Messianic movement, even within the Hebrew roots movement and whatnot, I think people don't get this right. And, I was talking to Wilbur the other day. We were talking about replacement theology and how this is a problem. But it's also, I think, a lot of the mainstream Messianic Judaism, and Wilbur said this, not me. David Wilbur was saying to me, he said, I think the attacks on one law theology from the mainstream Messianic Jewish movement are coming from a baseless fear of replacement theology. It's and I think he's right. So anyway, we've been talking about this. It's been on my mind a lot. But when we ask the question, are the Jews, and I mean all 12 tribes of Israel, are the 12 tribes of Israel still God's chosen people? I mean, I would be interested in the chat room or, send me an email. What do you think? Caleb, they use Malachi 1:11 to justify their use of Gentile priests. Interesting. Okay. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. Let's go take a look at Malachi. Hang on. I'm going to find a different Malachi 1:11. Oh, we could go to Isaiah, 66 as well, right? For from the rising of the sun to its setting, my name will be great among the nations, and in every place incense will be offered to my name, and a pure offering for my name will be great among the nations, says the Lord of hosts. Yeah, I mean, I think that obviously to say that we can establish a new priesthood because of Malachi 1:11, I don't know. I think that's eisegesis for sure. Beyond that, I mean, in my opinion, the smartest place to go for that theology, if I was going to uphold a errant theology like that, I think I'd go to Isaiah 66. It says that there will be those from the nations that become Kohanim, they become priests, right? Anyway, okay, so let's go back to the task at hand. What do you think? Do you think that the 12 tribes of Israel, the physical descendants of Jacob, are still God's chosen people? My answer is a unashamed, resounding absolutely. Yes, they are. And we can hash this out a little bit more if we want to. And I think it's important to do that. Okay, so I think that you have the physical descendants of Jacob, which are the 12 tribes. I think that people can attach themselves to those tribes. And let's read some comments before we jump into this. I would say that absolutely, yes, the Jewish people still are. Jeremiah 31:35 through 37 makes this clear. I do, however, think that they are not the only people who are part of Israel. The John 17 Project for the win on this one. Rose says, yes, I'd say they are still the chosen people. Okay, so I am preaching to the choir, but we'll go through it real quick. Anyway, I think that you have the physical descendants of Jacob. Abraham has promised something, right? He's promised a covenant that goes through Isaac and then ultimately through Jacob and into the 12 tribes. And this is a promise that God has not retracted. He's not going to retract it, right? He says that, we could go to a lot of different places to talk about this. And I think that the John 17 Project is absolutely right. Jeremiah 31 and following is a perfect example of this. The church, quote unquote, the church is never given a covenant. They're never given the new covenant, right? The new covenant is made with the house of Israel and the house of Judah, right? It's made with Israel. So the notion that the church has a covenant it can't be found. And I've said this before, but this was one of the major problems with the emerging theology of dispensationalism. They didn't know what to do with the fact that Israel was given a covenant, but the church wasn't. That went away quickly. But anyway, so I think that the physical descendants of Jacob are still the chosen people of Israel. And I think that they have access. They are born into covenants. They're born into the Abrahamic covenant. They are born into, and therefore, because they are born into the Abrahamic covenant, and that's, I think, probably the main one that needs to be focused on here when we're talking about bloodline, right? Because they're born into the Abrahamic covenant, they have land rights. They have rights to the land of Israel. And because the physical descendants of Jacob have land rights, okay, they are therefore, there's something special about that. Now, just because they aren't believers in Yeshua, just because the nation of Israel as a whole isn't believers in Yeshua, okay, does not mean that they do not still have land rights. God might exile his people, right, for not obeying him, not following him. And I think that this is what happens in 70. Right? Yeshua comes, and this is prophesied, right? In Daniel. Yeshua comes, he's crucified. There's a time for the Jews to be able to accept Yeshua. They ultimately, the majority, reject him. And then what happens? The temple falls, and God exiles his people. So I think that this is what has happened. However, this does not mean that Israel is no longer God's people. Even when Israel is in exile, right? And we see this in Daniel again. We see that Daniel is in Babylon. He's still praying towards Jerusalem. Israel is still God's people. Okay. Now, what this does not mean is that Israel is part of the new covenant instantaneously. I think that the new covenant is through faith, right? So Hebrew Hill says, I think they are Israel. However, what do we do with people whose circumcision becomes uncircumcision? Is that just a reference to your covenantal standing? I ask because I think Esau is a curious person. He is literally the nations and a physical descendant of Isaac / Abraham. Okay, yeah, this is a great question, and I think that what Paul is saying, especially in Romans, right? He talks about this a lot in Romans, is that you don't have entrance into the new covenant. So a person can be a covenant member and have land rights, but that doesn't mean that they are a new covenant member, right? And if you don't enter the new covenant, then what's going to happen? Eventually you're going to be broken off. So what I see is, and this is really where I think I differ from mainstream Christianity when it comes to the theology of Israel. I believe that the physical descendants of Israel make up the tree of Israel, right? The tree, let's call it Israel, the tree of the covenant members, okay? And that Gentiles, right, can come to Israel and be grafted in. So the Gentiles are grafted into this tree and become covenant members. They become part of Israel. Does that mean that they become Jewish? No. The Gentiles remain Gentiles, but they become part of Israel and they become covenant members. This is what I refer to and my father has referred to as enlargement theology, right? It's not replacement theology, it's enlargement theology. Once again, back to my conversation yesterday with Wilbur, I was talking to Wilbur and I said, what's interesting about the idea of replacement theology is that mainstream Judaism, non-believing mainstream Judaism, and therefore the UMJC, right? They say if you're a Gentile and you feel like you want to become Jewish, you come and you do this ritual. You go through a year or two of training, and then you become circumcised. And then what happens? You become Jewish. You're no longer a Gentile. You become Jewish. This is much more replacement theology. This is much more replacement theology than one law theology that says the Gentiles remain Gentiles. You're saying that a Gentile becomes a Jew. Literally, that's replacement theology. Right? So to me, it's a little bit comical. Maybe that's the wrong way to look at it, but it's a little bit comical that you have the UMJC that are so afraid that the Gentiles are, that people are going to think that the Gentiles replace, there's going to be no distinction between Jew and Gentile. But then if you want to convert with the UMJC, you convert and you are considered Jewish. Isn't that ironic? Isn't that more replacement theology? I think so. Okay, a Jew is not just a Jew outwardly. Paul references Deuteronomy 10 and 30 when he discusses the circumcision of the heart. So I think it is very much about covenant membership. Absolutely. But I completely agree with you. It's 100% about covenant membership. But when we look at the nation of Israel today, the non-believing nation of Israel, and I would say that the majority of Israel, of the physical nation of Israel today in the land, they're not religious. They don't even hold to a form of Judaism. They're agnostics, or they're atheists, or whatever you want to say. They're not following God in any way. They're not even attempting to follow God, right? So when we look at them, can we say that is Israel? I would say that, yeah, they are still, there is still something special about that people and about that nation that we have on earth. Do I think that they're saved? New covenant members? No, I don't think that they're new covenant members. I think that no one comes to the Father but through me, says our master, right? And so I think that you have to have faith in Yeshua to be a new covenant member. And if you're not, then you will be one of the branches that is broken off. But when I look at the nation of Israel, I still say, look, these people are part of at least some part of the covenant today, even if it's only temporal, even if it only means that they have land rights in Israel, right? Okay, let's keep going. That was a tangent, right? All right. Since studying this in Scripture, I have come to the conclusion that Israel is three things biblically. Ooh, okay. List the three things while we keep going. Three things biblically. I can't wait for this one. I'm being serious, by the way. I'm not trying to sound... Okay, let's keep going.
All right, so we need to say right off the bat that the four sects of Judaism all agree that neither Messianic Jews or Black Israelites are...
Let's pause. So he references four branches of Judaism. I think he's referring to, and I could be wrong on this, I don't know what he's referring to exactly. I think he's referring to Reform Judaism, Conservative Judaism, Orthodox Judaism, and Hasidic Judaism. Though that's what I think he's referring to. However, I would say that even that is problematic because you have other forms of Judaism. People... Even religious Jews, non-believing religious Jews, want to compact this a little bit more than it is. There's Sephardic Jews, there's Ashkenazi Jews, there's different practices. And granted, they are all fairly similar, right? Maybe a little bit different in the prayer books and whatnot, but ultimately there are other forms of Judaisms than just the four that I think he's referencing. Let's go back to the John 17 project because this is interesting to me. Okay, so number one, remember he said that there's three things biblically he thinks Israel is. Number one, the physical descendants of Abraham. Number two, the land promised to Abraham. And number three, the covenant members, both Jew and Gentile, that follow Messiah. Yeah, I totally agree. I think you hit the nail on the head with that one. Okay, let's rewind. Did I already rewind? Let's come back just a little bit.
Jews or black Israelites are actual Jews. In fact, that's probably
Okay, hang on. Let's go back even farther. I want to catch this point.
all right. So we need to say right off the bat that the four sects of Judaism all agree that neither Messianic Jews or black Israelites are actual Jews. In fact,
He's right on this from the non-believing perspective of Judaism. They would say that if you have physical lineage as a Jew, but you believe in Yeshua as the Messiah, you're no longer Jewish. You've essentially been cut off. And they'd say the same thing about, I think they just dismiss out of hand the idea that the black Hebrew Israelites are in fact the true Jews, which I think is probably correct, right? However, I will say this, when I was in Israel, I was pleasantly surprised to find a significant amount of Ethiopian Jews in the land, and there's a good amount of Ethiopian Jews who are coming back to the land. So when you get to Israel, it's not like everybody looks the same, right? There are people from all over the world. You have Ashkenazi Jews, you have Russian Jews, you have Ethiopian Jews, you have African Jews. So the point is that it's not like everybody looks the same. It's a melting pot of Jews in the land, which is Baruch Hashem, right? I mean, to me, that is it's prophecy coming true, right? Okay, let's keep going. So I understand what he's saying. However, I would push, not on him, but I would push on the notion that just because you believe in Yeshua that you're not Jewish, right? There are plenty of people that I think are Jewish by blood, obviously, who believe in Yeshua, right? Okay, here we go.
In fact, that's probably the only thing that all four sects of Judaism agree on. So it's not possible for a Gentile to convert to Judaism through either of these two movements.
That's true. However, one of the things that I would say is, and once again, going back to kind of my conversation, like how I got here kind of a conversation, one of the things that I would say is, I think that what we see, the initial movement that we see is a sect of Judaism. From Yeshua, after Yeshua ascends, the disciples, Paul, what they are teaching, what they are trying to expands across the world is not a new religion of Christianity. It is a form of Judaism. It is a sect of Judaism. And I think that what we're seeing right now, this rise of Torah observance among believers, right? The Torah movement as a whole, I think is actually a return to that sect of Judaism. And this is one of the reasons that I think maybe this is one of the reasons I had such a hard time in the Christian church, is because they want to be completely separate and other than anything Jewish. And I think he actually is going to bring up some of the writings of the church fathers. And I think that this is where we start to get into some real trouble because people don't want anything to do with like Judaism. Okay, here we go.
Let's take a minute, though, to explore this. And as we do, it's important to remember that both movements, or rather both of these things are movements. They're not monoliths. And so there's a lot of variation between Messianic congregations and also then Black Hebrew Israelite groups as well. So let's look at Messianic Jews first. So Messianic Jews are people of Jewish heritage who believe that Jesus, or Yeshua, is the Messiah and want to retain their Jewish identity.
Okay, this is interesting. So I think that he's taking, clearly he's done his research. I think he's taking from probably the main groups, right? The UMJC and the MJAA, which would say that that's what this is. I would contend that Messianic Judaism should not be, whether it is or not, is not really the point. It should not be about ethnicity. It should not be about whether or not you are physically Jewish. I think that Messianic Judaism should be about following the Rebbe, the Jewish rabbi who is the Mashiach, right? And therefore, we follow a form of Judaism. That's what I think Messianic Judaism should be if it's not. And I mean, ultimately, this is what I think one law theology is. Now, if you are a Torah observant Christian, you're in the Christian church. Give me 1 second here. you're in a Christian church, you're following the Torah. Maybe your pastors know that you're Torah observant, whatever, and they're okay with it. That's great. That's fine. And if you can do that, that's great. It wore me down. I couldn't do it. Hence, back to my home. But I think that ultimately, even people who are in that situation tend to look a lot different than the people in their church, right? Because what are they doing? They're following Yeshua as they see it in, even if you're not going to call it a sect of Judaism, it's essentially what it is. Okay, let's go.
Now, much of that Jewish identity, in their view, consists of the law of Moses, such as Old Testament festivals, weekly Sabbath observance, circumcision, and the dietary restrictions. Now, by identifying much of Mosaic law as their cultural identity, what they end up doing is separating themselves from the rest of Christianity.
So I think this guy actually has a pretty good handle on all this. He's going to say later that a lot of people don't see the Mosaic law as a cultural identity. And I don't think that the Mosaic law is a cultural identity, unless we're going to say that it is God's culture, and therefore every other person who becomes a covenant member conforms their own culture to God's culture. I've given this example many times, but if my wife is Mexican and she makes delicious Mexican kosher Mexican food. So we still eat Mexican food, but guess what? We have to conform it to God's culture, and we do that by making it kosher, right? So no longer is everything fried in pig lard. Okay, let's keep going.
Now, this is intentional on the part of many Messianic Jews because they simply don't want to be assimilated into the church and become functionally Gentile.
So I think that once again, I think he's pretty right on, but I also, and especially right on for what I think would be considered mainstream Messianic Judaism. However, to me personally, it's not about becoming Gentile or anything like that. Once again, if we are actually following a Jewish rabbi, then we should be following a Jewish rabbi.
You don't feel like getting up, going out,
Sorry, hang on just a second. We gotta get through the commercial.
Congregations, though, go further by laying necessity upon Mosaic law, especially on circumcision, because they believe that the Jews are special participants in God's covenant with Abraham in a way that Gentiles cannot be.
And the only thing I'd say about this is that I think we've already covered this. I think he's right in the terms of so I think he's wrong a little bit, but I think that the physical descendants of Jacob do have land rights. They do have Abrahamic covenant inclusion. Now, not Abrahamic promise inclusion necessarily. Okay, Canada for Israel says, what does Paul's meaning if he says that circumcision is nothing, uncircumcision is nothing, but keeping the commandments of God? He talks about a new creation. What do we do with 1 Corinthians 12, 13, and 14? Okay, well, I mean, yeah, I've covered this quite a bit, but my position is that Paul is against the notion that a person has to go through a conversion process to be considered a covenant member. Therefore, the shorthand for this conversion process is circumcision. So replace circumcision with proselyte conversion. Proselyte conversion is nothing. Non-proselyte conversion is nothing. What matters is keeping the commandments of God. In other words, it's a heart issue, and we see this throughout not only Paul, but we see it in the prophets as well. Right? Okay, let's keep going here.
To all of this, though, St. Paul writes in Romans chapter 2, verses 28 and 29, that it's not the physical circumcision that makes one a member of God's chosen people, but, he says, circumcision is that of the heart, in the spirit, not in the letter.
Okay, so this is great. I actually think he's hitting on some great points here. In fact, we could go to Romans 2. Sorry. So I'm in Galatians 3. Okay. Here, let me see if I can kick over to you guys. There you go. Okay. I'm in the ESV. on the left. Therefore, you have no excuse, O man. Where is he? He's down quite a ways, isn't he? Lead to repentance. He will render each one according to his works. To those who by patience in well-doing seek for glory and honor. Okay. For all who have sinned, is he all the way down in 20? All who have sinned without the law will also perish without the law, and all who have sinned under the law will be judged by the law. For it is not the hearers of the law who are righteous before God, but the doers of the law who will be justified. Man, isn't that a problem for isn't that a problem for mainstream Christianity? Anyway, for when Gentiles who do not have the law by nature do what the law requires, they are a law to themselves, even though they do not have the law. And this translation is a little interesting. I think what he's saying here is a Gentile is raised without knowledge of the law, right? In other words, they weren't raised doing these things, but once they come to faith, guess what? Now they're keeping the law. They show that the work of the law is written on their hearts, while their conscience also bears witness, and their conflicting thoughts accuse or even excuse them. On that day, so on and so forth. Okay. Where does he talk about? I think it's right down here. Yeah, so anyway, I think, here. For circumcision indeed is of value if you obey the law, but if you break the law, your circumcision becomes uncircumcision. So if a man who is uncircumcised keeps the precepts of the law, will not his uncircumcision be regarded as circumcision? This plays in very well, right, to Paul's, to what Paul says, obviously, because it's in the same letter, in chapter 4. He's going to get to the part where he talks about the fact that Abraham had faith, and it was reckoned to him as righteousness. This is before he's circumcised, right? So once again, it is my contention that what Paul is fighting here is this notion that a Gentile has to go through a ritual of conversion or even physical circumcision before he's considered a covenant member. What Paul is saying is, no, Abraham was a covenant member before he got circumcised. So don't treat people like, remember that in the first century, we see this, by the way, Paul just excoriates Peter because in Galatians 2, because he won't eat with Gentiles. Well, in the first century, for a Jew to sit down and eat with a Gentile, you couldn't do that. And so you have people who say that they have faith in the Messiah, and you have Jews who are not eating with them. They're saying, no, you can't eat with us. We can't associate with you in that way. Why? Because you're not a covenant member yet. You have to go get circumcised. And Paul's like, no, what are you talking about? These people have faith. So, if a man who is uncircumcised keeps the precepts of the law, will not his uncircumcision be regarded as circumcision? Then he who is physically uncircumcised but keeps the law will condemn you, who have the written code and circumcision but break the law. For no one is a Jew who is merely one outwardly. And what does he mean by Jew here? Once again, I don't think he's talking about just, so back to my very first conversation, I don't think he's just talking about those from Judea or those from, from the tribe of Judah. I think that he's talking about Israel at this point. So, for no one is a Jew who is merely one outwardly, nor is circumcision outward and physical. In other words, you become a covenant member not through the physical act of circumcision. But a Jew is one inwardly, and circumcision is a matter of the heart, by the Spirit, not by the letter. His praise is not from man, but from God. So, this is how I understand this. Let's see if the comments in the chat room have gone off. When you say the form of Judaism that Yeshua lived, isn't that the same way as what both Israelites and foreigners were taught to live during the Exodus? Yes. Yes. I would say so. But remember that Yeshua is also working with, so let's ask this question. I mean, progressive revelation, right? So we have progressive revelation. Let's ask this question. Did Yeshua tie tefillin? Did the Israelites in the wilderness, did they tie tefillin? No, probably not. Do they wear tzitzit? Maybe, right? But clearly, by the time you get to Israel living in the land, things are progressing, right? I think that Yeshua did tie tefillin. Once again, he references tefillin. He references tzitzit. He says that the Pharisees make their tzitzit and their tefillin big and long. And so he doesn't say, look at these Pharisees, they put boxes on their head and don't realize that it's metaphorical, right? He doesn't say that. He says, look at what the way that they're doing it is wrong. But he doesn't say what they're doing is wrong. So it's my contention that Yeshua is actually, I think that he's actually participating in what I think the Judaisms of the day are, but he's saying you're missing it. It's a heart issue. If you're just doing it to tie tefillin or to make people look at you or, whatever, to make people think that you're righteous, you have missed it. This is about a relationship with Hashem. I guess that's my point. Okay, let's keep going. I think he gets to my favorite chapter of the Bible here shortly.
The Mosaic Law isn't a matter of Jewish culture, it's a matter of Jewish religion.
Exactly.
The law, on top of all of it.
We would have to define religion, but I would say it's not a matter of culture. I think it's actually a matter of covenant relationship with God. Right? That's what I would say.
Has served its purpose since Messiah has come. St. Paul says as much in Galatians 3:24 and 25. He says that the law was...
Okay, hang on just a sec. Candidate for Israel comments, as Romans 7 says, the law is spiritual. How's the law not always been spiritual? Abraham was considered righteous before he was circumcised. Absolutely. I completely agree. And I think that the law is spiritual. Right? It's both. We have there's a spiritual element to everything that we do, right? And there's and people call this, like, oh, you're trying to keep the shadows. I don't think that there's anything wrong with shadows, and I think that we continue to have these shadows of the things that are in the heavenly realm. There's nothing wrong with that. So anyway, this gentleman has gotten now, and I don't know who this guy is. I apologize for that, but he has gotten to my favorite chapter. Let's rewind just a little bit. Yet we are all made of 3 parts spirit, soul, body. Okay, here we go.
The law, on top of all of this, has served its purpose since Messiah has come. St. Paul says as much in Galatians 3:24 and 25. He says that the law was our tutor to bring us to Christ, that we might be justified by faith.
This is interesting because I think he's taking a very standard Christian view, so that shouldn't be surprising to us at all. However, I would push on this. I think that he actually, and he has videos on moral, civil, ceremonial law. I think that if we really pushed on this gentleman, I think that he would admit that there are plenty of pieces of the law that are still in play today, right? And I think that if we started to look at trying to make distinctions between civil, ceremonial, and moral, I think that we could show that there are problems with that. He goes, however, to Galatians 3, and I think that this is one of the more misunderstood passages in the scriptures. Let's go to it. So Galatians 3. Oh, foolish Galatians. I love this. I love it. All right. So he, of course, everyone knows one of my favorite verses in the Bible is 8. In the scripture, foreseeing that God would justify the Gentiles by faith, preached the gospel beforehand to Abraham, saying, in your seed, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. So then those who are of faith are blessed along with Abraham, the man of faith. So this is actually where the theological setup for this idea of the tutor begins. So those who are of faith are blessed. If you have faith in the Messiah, you are in the new covenant and you are blessed, right? But there's a counter to this. For all who rely on works of the law are under the curse. Now, there is, of course, and I got a lot of comments on this, there is, of course, the notion that this term, works of the law, which in Hebrew is Maaseh Torah, is a catchphrase or is at least used by the Qumranis. And Dr. Marty Abegg did a lot of work on this, right? So in the community rule at Qumran, they use this term Maaseh Torah, which is the works of the law. And of course, everything that they consider to be works of the law in that document can't be found in the Torah. It's all community rule. And so there are some who have said, well, we need to read, and I mean, good scholars, right? And even Van Hoff and myself have said this. Like, we should probably consider that Paul might be referring to man-made works of the law, not commandments in Torah, right? And so the question is, how should we read this? I don't think it actually matters in this passage, which direction you want to go. Is it man-made, proselyte conversion? Is it works of the Torah, like commandments in the Torah? No matter which way you go, the point is still going to be the same, because ultimately he's saying if you're relying on something that you're doing, then you're cursed. Now, the point here is curse. Like, this is really the word that I think needs to be focused on here, but when we get down to the tutor. So he says, for all who rely on works of the law, and this could be proselyte conversion, man-made proselyte conversion, which is, I think, likely, or it could be those who think that if they keep the Torah, they're going to be saved. That could be possible too. So you have the new perspective on Paul versus the Luther interpretation of this passage. And the wording as well. I think he uses works of the law in Romans. For it is written, cursed is everyone who does not abide by all things written in the book of the law and do them. So we have this juxtaposition, right? We have the idea of a blessing for those who are in faith, right? And then we have the idea of cursed for those who rely on something other than faith, right? Hang on. I just want to make sure. Thanks for works of the law. I lean towards. Let's read this one. Hebrew Hill says, thanks for your take on works of the law. I lean towards he might be talking about Essene doctrine. However, I agree it applies universally. Yeah, and once again, I don't think that it actually matters which way we're going to take this, because this is not his point. His point is actually something different. It's that there's a curse. This is the point, that there is blessing and there is curse. These two boxes. Okay, let's keep going. I love this chapter. Let's just read the whole thing, right? Now, it is evident that no one is justified before God by the law, for the righteous shall live by faith, right? He's still talking about Abraham. But the law is not of faith, rather the one who does them shall live by them. He's quoting, of course, Messiah or Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law. Once again, this is extremely important, the curse of the law. And I think that this is the key to the tutor passage, which we're going to get to. By becoming a curse for us, for it is written, cursed is everyone who is hung on a tree. So that that Yeshua Messiah, the blessing of Abraham in Yeshua Messiah, and I just wrote an excursus on Paul's use of the term in Messiah, so that in Messiah Yeshua, the blessing of Abraham might come to the Gentiles, so that we might receive the promised Spirit through faith. To give a human example, brothers. So he moves to a human example, but keep in mind, he's still talking about this curse versus blessing. To give a human example, brothers, even with a man-made covenant, no one annuls it or adds to it once it has been ratified. Now, the promises were made to Abraham and to his offspring. It does not say, and to offsprings, referring to many, but referring to one, and to your offspring, who is Christ, who is Messiah. This is what I mean. The law, which came 430 years afterward, does not annul a covenant previously ratified by God so as to make the promise void. For if the inheritance comes by the law, it no longer comes by promise, but God gave it to Abraham by a promise. Why then the law? It was added because of transgressions until the offspring should come to whom the promise had been made, and it was put in place through angels by an intermediary. This is an interesting passage, which I think a lot of people get wrong. So anyway, why was the law given? Well, it was given because of transgression. What does that mean? It means that it was given to point us to the Messiah. How? Well, we knew that if we broke the law, what was going to happen? A curse. So there is a fear of this curse, right? And what will that do? If there's a fear of the curse, what do? We run to God. We look to God to help with this curse. This is what I think he's saying. Now, an intermediary implies more than one, but God is one. Is the law then contrary to the promises of God? Certainly not. For if a law had been given that could give life, then righteousness would indeed be by the law. But Scripture imprisoned everything under sin, so that the promise by faith in Yeshua Messiah might be given to those who believe. Believe in what? In the coming seed. And we see this in Abraham, once again, back to verse 8. Now, before faith came, we were held captive under the law. So this is not, what he's not saying is that faith came when Yeshua came. It means that we were held captive under the law. And what does it mean to be under the law? It means to be under the curse of the law. He's already used this term curse. So to be under the law is to be under the curse of the law. Now, before faith came, we were held captive under, we could almost put the word curse here, under the curse of the law, imprisoned until the coming faith would be revealed. So then, the law was our guardian until Messiah came, in order that we might be justified by faith. What does he mean by this? He means that it was our guardian to try to get, so this curse tried to point us to God, to find faith in the coming seed. But now that faith has come, we are no longer under a guardian. In other words, we're no longer under that curse. We don't need to be pointed because faith has come. We have faith in that Messiah. Now we're set free. For the Messiah Yeshua, for in Messiah Yeshua, you are all sons of God through faith. Remember, he's talking to the Galatians here, Gentiles, right? For as many of you as were baptized into Messiah have put on Messiah. There is neither Jew nor Greek. There is neither slave nor free, so on and so forth. Okay, so that is my interpretation of what he means by guardian. I think the guardian is in fact the curse of the law. I know that sounds weird, but I think that the guardian is to point us to God and get us to look for that seed, which is faith. Then once faith comes, we don't need that because we don't have the curse anymore. We don't have that curse anymore. We don't have to be afraid of a curse. We have faith. That's how I take it. All right, let's see if the only reason I think that the Maaseh HaTorah would be relevant to us now is that people tried to say Yeshua was an Essene or endorsed the Zedekite priesthood. Their view is problematic. Yeah, it is problematic. I'm not saying that it doesn't matter. I'm just saying that it doesn't matter for his point, whether or not you take it one way or the other, right? It doesn't matter if you take it that it's the works of the law, like the commandments of the Torah, or whether or not you take it that it's a man-made thing. Now, it makes a whole lot of sense with the rest of the letter if the works of the law is a man-made ritual or a man-made proselyte conversion. In other words, he's talking about man-made commandments. Okay, I think we're pretty much done. He does get into some more interesting stuff. I will link this. I will link the video in the. Sorry, let me kick back over here. I will link the video in the description of this video so you can go watch the whole thing if you want to. I think we're going to probably come back next week and get back into the end of Rudolph's paper. Remember that Rudolph, at the end of his paper, he goes into replacement theology, which I'm with him on replacement theology. I think that replacement theology is horrible. However, of course, Rudolph believes that I believe in a quasi replacement theology. Anyway, all right. I hope that this conversation, has been good for you. I hope you've learned something. Please, please, please remember to subscribe to this YouTube channel if you have not already. It really does help me. And yeah, thanks everybody in the chat room. Great discussions in there. All right. I hope this conversation has done at least one thing. That is to glorify our great God and Savior, Yeshua the Messiah. Why? I think you know why. Because Messiah matters.